Chapter 4, Section 2. Sanshiro's world had split into three. The first was far away, carrying the faint scent of what Yojiro called the era before Meiji 15. Everything was peaceful, but everything was also half asleep. Not that going back would take any effort, though. He could return whenever he wanted, but as long as things haven't come to that, he has no desire to go back. It's like a fire exit, really. Something you keep in reserve but never actually use. Sanshiro had sealed away the past he had shed and locked it inside this refuge. The thought that he had buried even his beloved mother there made him feel a sudden pang of guilt. So whenever a letter arrived, he would linger for a while in that world, savoring the warmth of old memories. The second world contains moss-covered brick buildings. From one end to the other, the reading room stretches so wide that you can barely make out the faces of the people on the far side. Books are stacked so high you'd need a ladder just to reach them. Worn smooth by countless hands, darkened by years of grime, yet glittering with gold lettering. Sheepskin, cowhide, paper 200 years old, and over all of it, a layer of dust. Dust that took 20 or 30 years to settle, precious dust. It is a dust so still it outlasts even the quietest of tomorrows. And when you catch a glimpse of the figures moving through this second world, they almost always have unkempt, unshaven beards. Some of them walk with their eyes on the sky. Others walk with their heads bowed down. Their clothes are always a mess. Their lives are almost certainly poor. And yet they carry on, perfectly at ease. Surrounded by streetcars on all sides, they breathe in the peaceful air without a care in the world, as freely as the open sky. Those who enter this world are unfortunate because they know nothing of the real world, and yet blessed because they have escaped its burning house. Prof. Hirota lives in this world. Nonomiya does too. Sanshiro had gotten just far enough into that world to understand its atmosphere. He could leave if he wanted to. But it seemed a shame to walk away from a taste he had only just begun to acquire. The third world sparkles and hums like springtime. There are electric lights. There are silver spoons. There are cheers and bright laughter. There are glasses of sparkling champagne. And crowning it all, there are beautiful women. Sanshiro had spoken to one of those women. He had looked at one of them twice. This world was, for Sanshiro, the most profound world of all, and it was right there in front of him. Yet it was impossible to get close. In that way, it was no different from lightning flashing somewhere far off in the sky. Sanshiro watched this world from a distance and found it utterly bewildering. He had a feeling that if he didn't find his place somewhere in that world, there would be a hole in it, something missing that only he could fill. He had a feeling that somewhere in this world, he was meant to be the protagonist. And yet this world, which should by all rights be flourishing and free, had instead turned in on itself and blocked the very path Sanshiro should have been able to walk through as he pleased. All of this struck Sanshiro as deeply puzzling. Lying in his bedding, he lined up these three worlds in his mind and turned them over, comparing one against another. Then he stirred all three worlds together and drew a single conclusion from the mix. The conclusion he arrived at was perfectly simple. Bring his mother up from home, find himself a lovely wife, and dedicate himself to his studies. It was about as ordinary a conclusion as you could get. But before arriving at that conclusion, he had turned the matter over in many different ways. And to a thinker who weighs the mental effort expended and judges the value of a conclusion accordingly, it wasn't all that ordinary, really. But going that route meant representing the whole vast third world with just one wife. And there were so many beautiful women out there. There are so many beautiful women in the world. Translate beautiful women, and you get all kinds of things. Sanshiro tried using the word translate the way Prof. Hirota did. And yet, as long as something can be translated into terms of genuine human character, one must, in order to broaden the range of influence that such a translation produces, and to fully realize one's own individuality, he needed to meet as many beautiful women as possible. To know only one's wife and be satisfied with that is practically choosing to hold back your own growth. Sanshiro stretched his logic out that far, then thought to himself that he'd been getting a little too caught up in Prof. Hirota's way of thinking. The truth was, he didn't feel that lack quite as keenly as all that. The next day, he went to school, and as usual, the lectures were dull. But the air inside the classroom still felt a world apart from ordinary life, so by 3 in the afternoon, by the time 3 o'clock came, Sanshiro had completely lost himself in that second world, walking along with the air of some great man when he nearly ran headlong into Yojiro right in front of the police box at Oiwake. Ah ha ha ha! Ah ha ha ha! That put a complete end to his air of greatness. Even the policeman at the Koban was smirking. What's so funny? Oh, come on. Walk like a normal person, would you? You looked like something straight out of romantic irony. Sanshiro didn't quite understand what that foreign phrase meant. So instead he just asked, "Did you find a place?" "That's actually why I was heading to your place just now. Tomorrow's the big day. We're moving. Come help me out." "Where are you moving to?" "Nishikatamachi, number 10, Unit 3. Get there by 9 and sweep the place out. Wait for me, I'll be along after. 9 o'clock, got it? Number 3. See you." Yojiro rushed off. Sanshiro hurried back to his lodgings. That same evening, he turned back and looked up the phrase romantic irony at the library and found that it was a term coined by the German Schlegel. It went on to say that, according to this idea, a true genius must have no particular goals or ambitions and must simply wander around aimlessly all day long, or they'll never amount to anything. Sanshiro finally felt relieved, headed back to his lodgings, and went straight to sleep. The next day, he had made a promise, so despite it being Tencho Setsu, he got up at his usual time, and instead of heading to school, he made his way to 10 Nishikatamachi and looked for Unit 3. It sat in the middle of a surprisingly narrow lane. It was an old house. Instead of a proper entryway, there was a single Western-style room jutting out at the front, with a Japanese sitting room set at a right angle to it. Behind the main room was the sitting area, and beyond that, the kitchen, then the maid's room, all lined up in order. There was also a second floor, though it was hard to say how many tatami mats it had. Sanshiro had been asked to clean the place, but he decided there was really nothing that needed cleaning. Not that it was spotless by any means. But look as he might, there was really nothing worth throwing out. He figured the only things really worth throwing out were the tatami and the fittings, and with that thought still in his head, he slid open the storm shutters and settled down on the veranda off the main room to look out at the garden. There was a large crepe myrtle tree, but the roots were on the neighbor's side, so more than half the trunk just leaned over the cedar hedge, encroaching on this side of the property. There was also a large cherry tree. The cherry tree, at least, was clearly growing inside the fence. But in return, half its branches had crept out over the road, and before long they'd be getting in the way of the telephone lines. There was one chrysanthemum plant, but it looked like a winter chrysanthemum, and it hadn't bloomed at all. Beyond that, there was nothing else. It was a rather forlorn little garden. The one thing it had going for it was the soil, perfectly level and fine-grained, almost beautiful in its own way. Sanshiro found himself just staring at the ground. Really, it was that kind of garden, one that invited you to look at the earth itself. Just then, the bell from the higher school began to ring for the Tencho Setsu ceremony. Sanshiro listened to it and figured it must be 9 o'clock. He figured he should probably do something, and eventually thought maybe he could sweep up the dead cherry leaves, only to realize there was no broom. He sat back down on the veranda. He'd barely been sitting 2 minutes when the garden gate slid quietly open, and to his surprise, the woman from the pond stepped into the garden. The garden was enclosed on 2 sides by hedges. The square plot was less than 10 tsubo. The moment Sanshiro saw the woman from the pond standing there in that small enclosed garden, it came to him all at once. Flowers are meant to be cut and admired in a vase. At that moment, Sanshiro rose from the veranda, and the woman stepped away from the gate. "Excuse me," she said, opening with that phrase as she gave a small bow. She dipped forward from the waist in her usual way, but never once lowered her face. Even as she bowed, she kept her eyes fixed on Sanshiro. From where Sanshiro stood, her throat looked long and graceful. And at that same moment, her eyes caught his. A few days earlier, Sanshiro's aesthetics professor had shown him a painting by Greuze. The aesthetics professor had explained that the women in those portraits were all painted with voluptuous expressions. Voluptuous. There was no other word to describe the look in the woman's eyes at that moment by the pond. She was appealing to something, reaching out with a kind of sensuous, wordless plea, and it was undeniably an appeal to the senses. But it was the kind of appeal that cut through bone and reached the very marrow. It went beyond what sweetness could bear, tipping over into something sharp and piercing. You couldn't really call it sweet. It was closer to pain. And it was nothing like cheap, coy flirtation. It was the kind of gaze so ruthlessly captivating that the one being looked at would feel desperate to win her favor. And yet there was nothing about this woman that resembled a Greuze painting. Her eyes were half the size of the ones in the Greuze painting. "Excuse me, is this where Prof. Hirota is moving to?" "Yes, this is the place." Compared to the woman's voice and tone, Sanshiro's reply was terribly blunt. He knew it too, but he couldn't think of any other way to answer. "Has he not moved in yet?" Her words were clear and direct, with none of the usual trailing vagueness at the end. "He hasn't arrived yet. He'll be here soon." The woman hesitated for a moment. She was carrying a large basket in her hand. Her kimono, as always, was hard to make out. What caught his eye was simply that it didn't shine the way it usually did. The fabric had some kind of texture to it, bumpy and uneven, with what might have been stripes or a pattern of some sort. The pattern on it was completely random and haphazard. Cherry leaves drifted down from above every now and then. One of them landed on the lid of her basket. No sooner had it landed than the wind carried it away. The wind wrapped itself around her. She stood there in the middle of autumn. "And you are." Just as the wind moved on to the next yard, the woman spoke to Sanshiro. "I came to help with the cleaning," he said. But since she had just caught him sitting there with a blank look on his face, Sanshiro couldn't help finding it funny himself. The woman laughed and said, "Well then, perhaps I'll wait with you for a little while." The way she said it sounded to Sanshiro like she was asking his permission, and that made him quite happy. So he said, "Sure." In Sanshiro's mind, he'd meant it as shorthand for, "Oh, please, go ahead and wait." But she was still just standing there. He had no choice, so he asked her the same question she had asked him before. "And you are?" At that, the woman set her basket on the veranda and pulled a calling card from her sash, handing it to Sanshiro. The card read, "Satomi Mineko." She lived in Masago-cho, Hongo, just across the valley. While Sanshiro was looking over the card, the woman sat down on the veranda. "We have met before, haven't we?" said Sanshiro, raising his head as he slipped the card into his sleeve. "Yes." "At the hospital that one time," she said, turning to face him. "There's more." "And then by the pond," she added right away. She remembered it well. Sanshiro had nothing left to say. She wrapped things up with a polite, "I'm so sorry to have bothered you." And Sanshiro simply answered, "Not at all." A very brief exchange. The two of them sat gazing at the cherry tree branches. Only a few ragged, insect-eaten leaves still clung to the tips. The moving things were taking forever to arrive. "Are you here to see the professor about something?" Sanshiro asked this out of nowhere. The woman had been gazing up at the bare branches of the tall cherry tree, completely lost in thought, when she suddenly turned toward Sanshiro. Her expression said it all, as if she were shocked and a little offended. But her answer was perfectly calm. "I was asked to help out too." It was only then that Sanshiro noticed the veranda where the woman was sitting was covered in sand. "That's awful, all this sand. You'll get your kimono dirty." "Oh," she said, glancing left and right, but she didn't get up. After looking around the veranda for a moment, she turned her eyes to Sanshiro, and, "Did you sweep yet?" she asked, smiling. Sanshiro noticed something in that smile that felt easy to warm up to. Not yet. Would you like me to help? We can start together. Sanshiro got right up. The woman didn't move. Still perched on the edge of the veranda, she asked where he kept the broom and duster. Sanshiro explained that he had come empty-handed, so there was nothing like that around, and asked if he should go out to the street and buy some. She said that would be wasteful. She said it would be better to borrow one from next door. Sanshiro went next door right away. He rushed back with a broom, a duster, a bucket, and even a rag, and found her sitting in exactly the same spot as before. She was gazing up at the high branches of a cherry tree. "Oh, you found some," she said, just those few words. Sanshiro had the broom slung over his shoulder and the bucket dangling from his right hand. "Yep, found some," he said, stating the obvious. The woman stepped up onto the sandy veranda in her white tabi socks. Where she walked, her slender footprints were left behind. She reached into her sleeve and pulled out a white apron, tying it over her sash. The border of the apron was trimmed with something like lace. It was far too pretty a color to be wearing while doing housework. She picked up the broom. "Let me sweep it all out first," she said, pulling her right hand out from beneath her sleeve and tossing the dangling sleeve over her shoulder. Her slender arm was bare all the way to above the elbow. From the edge of the sleeve she'd hitched up, a glimpse of her beautiful under-kimono sleeve peeked through. Sanshiro had been standing there in a daze, but he suddenly rattled his bucket and slipped around to the back entrance. Mineko swept while Sanshiro followed behind with a rag, wiping down the tatami. Then, while Sanshiro beat the mats, Mineko dusted the shoji screens. By the time they had more or less finished cleaning, the two of them had grown quite comfortable with each other. While Sanshiro went to the kitchen to change the water in the bucket, Mineko picked up the duster and broom and headed upstairs. "Come up here for a second," she called down to Sanshiro from upstairs. "What is it?" Sanshiro called back from the bottom of the stairs, bucket in hand. She was standing in the dark. Her apron was a stark white. Sanshiro, still holding the bucket, climbed 2 or 3 steps up. She stayed perfectly still. Sanshiro climbed up 2 more steps. In the dim light, his face and Mineko's came within about a foot of each other. "What is it?" "It's so dark I can't tell what's going on." "Why?" "Just because." Sanshiro lost any urge to push further. He slipped past Mineko and made his way up to the top. He set the bucket down on the dark veranda and tried the door. Sure enough, he couldn't quite figure out how the latch worked. By the time he'd been fiddling with it a while, Mineko had come up too. "Still can't get it open?" Mineko moved to the other side. "It's over here." Sanshiro said nothing and stepped toward her. He was just about to brush Mineko's hand with his own when he kicked the bucket. It made a loud crash. When they finally managed to get one of the doors open, bright sunlight came streaming straight in, almost blinding them. The two looked at each other and burst out laughing. They opened the back window, too. It had a bamboo lattice over it. They could see the landlord's garden, where he kept some chickens. Mineko started sweeping, just as she always did. Sanshiro got down on all fours and started wiping the floor behind her. Mineko stood there holding the broom with both hands, watching him, and said, "My goodness." After a moment, she tossed the broom onto the tatami and walked over to the back window, where she stood gazing outside. By the time she had been standing there a while, Sanshiro had finished wiping down the floor. He tossed the wet rag into the bucket with a splash and came to stand beside Mineko at the window. "What are you looking at?" "Guess." "The chickens?" "No." "That big tree?" "No." "Well, what are you looking at then?" "I give up." "I've been watching that white cloud up there," she said. Sure enough, a white cloud was drifting across the wide open sky. The sky was endlessly clear, a deep, pure blue stretching as far as the eye could see, and across it, thick clouds bright as cotton went racing by. The wind must have been fierce, because when it tore at the edges of the clouds, they thinned out until you could almost see the blue sky right through them. or else the clouds would scatter and then gather again, bristling with soft white spines, like a cluster of fine needles. Mineko pointed to one of those clusters and said, "It looks like an ostrich boa, don't you think?" Sanshiro had no idea what a boa was, so he said as much. Mineko responded with, "Oh my," she said, but then kindly explained what a boa was. At that, Sanshiro said, "Oh, right, I know what that is." Then he explained that all those white clouds were made of tiny ice crystals, and that for them to appear to move that fast from down below, they'd have to be traveling faster than a hurricane, just as Nonomiya had told him the other day. He passed on what he had heard from Nonomiya the other day. Mineko glanced over at Sanshiro and said, "Oh, really?" But then added, "Snow just ruins it, don't you think?" in a tone that didn't leave much room for argument. "Why do you say that?" "Why? Because clouds have to be clouds. What's the point of gazing up at them from down here if they're not?" "Is that so? So you don't mind if it's snow?" "You seem to like looking up at high places." "I do." Mineko is still gazing up at the sky through the bamboo lattice. White clouds keep coming, one after another, drifting past. Then from somewhere far off comes the sound of a cart. He could tell from the rumbling through the ground that it had just turned down the quiet side street and was getting closer. "It's here," Sanshiro said. Mineko said, "That was quick," and then went still. She listened intently, as if the sound of the cart moving had some connection to the movement of the white clouds. The cart made its way through the quiet autumn air, steady and unhurried, drawing closer without mercy. Then it stopped in front of the gate. Sanshiro left Mineko behind and bolted down the stairs. Sanshiro stepped out to the entryway at the exact same moment Yojiro came through the gate. "You made good time," Yojiro called out first. "You're late," Sanshiro said. The opposite of what Mineko had said. "Late? I got everything out in one trip, what do you expect? And I was on my own. It's just the maid and the rickshaw man, and there's nothing they can do about it." "What about the professor?" "The professor's at school." While the two of them started talking, the cart driver began unloading the luggage, and the maid came inside as well. They left the kitchen to the maid and the cart driver, while Yojiro and Sanshiro started moving the books into the Western-style room. There were a lot of books. Getting them all arranged was going to be quite a job. "Has Miss Satomi arrived yet?" "She's here." "Where?" "Upstairs." "What's she doing up there?" "What do you mean, what is she doing? She's upstairs." "Come on, be serious." Yojiro, still holding a book in one hand, made his way along the hallway to the foot of the stairs and called out in that familiar voice of his, "Satomi-san, Satomi-san. Come help us sort through the books, would you?" he called up. "I'll be right there," came the reply. And Mineko came quietly down the stairs, carrying a broom and a duster. "What were you doing up there?" Yojiro called from below, pressing for an answer. "Cleaning the upstairs," came the reply from above. Yojiro couldn't wait for her to come down, so he brought Mineko straight to the doorway of the Western-style room. Books were piled up everywhere, unloaded by the cartman. Sanshiro had crouched down in the middle of it all, his back turned, and was busily reading something. "Oh my, what a mess." When Mineko said, "My goodness, what are we supposed to do with all this?" Sanshiro looked back over his shoulder from where he was crouching. He had a silly grin on his face. "Oh, it's not that bad. We just need to get all of this into the room and put it away. The professor should be back soon to help, so it won't be a problem. Hey, don't go squatting down and reading books on me. You can borrow them later and read at your leisure," Yojiro scolded. They fell into a natural rhythm. Mineko and Sanshiro lined up the books at the doorway, then passed them to Yojiro, who arranged them on the shelves inside the room. "Hey, don't just yank them out like that. There should be one more volume to go with this," said Yojiro, waving a flat blue book in the air. "But there isn't one." "There's no way it's not here." Found it, Sanshiro says. "Oh, let me see," Mineko says, leaning in close. "History of Intellectual Development. Oh, there it is." "Never mind, oh, there it is. Just hurry up and hand it over." The three of them kept at it steadily for about 30 minutes. By the end, even Yojiro had stopped rushing them quite so much. Sanshiro glanced over and saw Yojiro sitting cross-legged with his back to the bookshelf, not saying a word. Mineko gave Sanshiro a little nudge on the shoulder. Sanshiro laughed and, "Hey, you all right?" Sanshiro asked. "Yeah, I'm just thinking, what is the professor even planning to do with all these books he doesn't need? Honestly, what a pain. If I sold all these now and put the money into stocks, I'd actually make something. But there's nothing to be done about it," he sighed, and just sat there cross-legged, still facing the wall. Sanshiro and Mineko looked at each other and laughed. Since the one person who was supposed to be in charge wasn't moving, neither of them felt like going back to sorting the books. Sanshiro pulled out a book of poetry and started flipping through it. Mineko opened a large picture album on her lap. From the back of the house came the sound of the hired rickshaw man and the maid going at each other in a heated argument. It was terribly noisy. "Take a look at this," Mineko said in a soft voice. Sanshiro leaned over and brought his face close to the picture book on her lap. Mineko's hair was close enough that Sanshiro could smell her perfume. The picture in the book was of a mermaid. From the waist down, the woman's body turned into a fish, with the fish's tail curling all the way around her hips and disappearing behind her, just the tip peeking out on the other side. The woman is combing her long hair, catching the loose strands in her hand, and looking this way. Behind her stretches a wide open sea. "A mermaid, a mermaid." The two of them, heads nearly touching, whispered the same thing at the same moment. Yojiro, who had been sitting cross-legged nearby, must have gotten curious. "Hey, what are you two looking at?" Yojiro called out as he came into the hallway. The three of them huddled together and flipped through the sketchbook page by page. All kinds of comments came out. It was all pretty casual. Then Prof. Hirota came back from the Tensho Setsu ceremony in his frock coat, and the three of them flipped the sketchbook face down as they greeted him. The professor said they should get the books put away first, so the three of them buckled down and got back to work. With the man of the house now present, it seemed they couldn't afford to dawdle quite as much, and sure enough, about an hour later, somehow or other, all the books from the hallway had been packed away into the bookshelves. The four of them stood back and admired the neatly arranged books. "We can take care of the rest tomorrow," Yojiro said. It was as if she were saying, "This will have to do." "You've quite a collection here," Mineko said. "Professor, have you actually read all of these?" Sanshiro asked finally. It seemed Sanshiro genuinely needed to confirm this for his own reference. "Read all of them? Not a chance. Maybe Sasaki could, but..." Yojiro scratched his head. Sanshiro got serious and said that actually, he had been borrowing books little by little from the university library for a while now, and no matter which book he picked up, someone had always read it before him. He had even tried borrowing a novel by someone called Afra Bain, and sure enough, someone had gotten to that one too. He said he'd asked because he wanted to know just how far a person's reading could possibly go. "I've read Afra Bain myself," said Prof. Hirota. That one line was enough to stop Sanshiro cold. "I can't believe it. The professor has a habit of reading things nobody else reads," Yojiro said. Hirota laughed and headed toward the sitting room, probably to change his clothes. Mineko followed him out. Afterward, Yojiro said to Sanshiro, "That's exactly why he's a great darkness. He's read everything, but he never shines a bit. I wish he'd read things that were a little more in fashion and put himself out there a bit more." Yojiro's words were by no means a put-down. Sanshiro stood quietly, looking over the bookcase. Then Mineko's voice came from the sitting room. "I've got a treat for you both, so come on in." The two of them made their way from the study along the hallway to the sitting room, where they found a basket Mineko had brought sitting right in the middle of the floor. The lid was off. Inside were lots of sandwiches. Mineko sat beside the basket, arranging its contents onto small dishes. Yojiro and Mineko launched into their back and forth. "You actually remembered to bring it," he said. "Well, you specifically asked me to," she replied. Did you buy that basket too? No. You had it at home? Yes. It's awfully large. Did you bring a rickshaw man along with it? You should have had him stay and help for a bit. The rickshaw man is out on an errand today. Any woman can carry something this size, you know. Well, you could, maybe, but any other young lady would have thought twice about it. Do you really think so? Then I suppose I should have left it behind, too. Mineko kept sorting food onto the small plates while trading words with Yojiro. Not a moment's hesitation in anything she said. And yet she was completely calm and unhurried, barely even glancing at Yojiro's face. Sanshiro was deeply impressed. A maid came out from the kitchen carrying tea. The group gathered around the basket started in on the sandwiches. There was a stretch of quiet, but then Yojiro seemed to remember something and struck up a conversation with Prof. Hirota again. Professor, while I have the chance, let me ask you about that, Bane person you mentioned earlier. Afra Bane? So what exactly is this Afra Bane anyway? An English woman of letters, 17th century. The 17th century is too far back. That won't work as magazine material. She's old, yes, but she was the first woman to make a living as a novelist, which is what she's famous for. Famous is a problem. Let me ask a bit more then. What sort of things did she write? I've only read the one novel, Oronoko, but Miss Ogawa, wasn't there a novel by that name in the collected works? Sanshiro had completely forgotten. When Sanshiro asked the professor to explain the plot, it turned out to be about a black prince named Oronoko who is tricked by an English sea captain and sold into slavery. It was a story about all the terrible hardships he had to endure. And apparently, later generations came to believe this was the author's own first-hand account. That's fascinating. Miss Satomi, what do you say? Why not go ahead and write your own Oronoko? Yojiro turned toward Mineko again. I wouldn't mind writing one, but the thing is, I don't have any first-hand experiences like that. If you need a dark-skinned protagonist, Ogawa here would do just fine, wouldn't he? He's from Kyushu, so he's got a darker complexion. That's a terrible thing to say, Mineko said, as if defending Sanshiro. But then she turned straight to him and asked, would it be all right if I wrote about you? The moment he met her eyes, Sanshiro was reminded of that instant this morning when she had appeared through the folding gate, basket in hand. A warmth washed over him, like being gently drunk. But it was the kind of spell that left him frozen in his tracks. There was no way he could bring himself to say something like, please do. Prof. Hirota, true to form, reached for a cigarette and began to smoke. Yojiro had a name for this habit, saying the professor breathed philosophy out through his nose. And sure enough, the smoke did come out a little differently. Two thick, sturdy columns rose calmly from the nostrils. Yojiro sat gazing at those twin columns of smoke, leaning half his back against the sliding door, saying nothing. Sanshiro's eyes drifted absently over the garden. It didn't feel like moving house at all. It looked more like a small, casual gathering, and the conversation had that easy, relaxed feel to match. Only Mineko, tucked away behind Professor Hirota, had quietly started folding the western suit the professor had tossed aside a little while ago. It seemed she was also the one who had helped him into his Japanese clothes. Now, about that Oronoko story I mentioned, you tend to get things mixed up, so let me just clarify while I'm at it, the professor said, pausing his smoke for a moment. Right, I'll keep that in mind, Yojiro said, all proper and attentive. Now, after that novel came out, there's a separate piece, a stage adaptation written by someone named Southern, using the same title. Just wanted to mention it so you don't mix them up, since you tend to get careless about these things. Oh, I won't mix them up. Mineko, who had been folding the suit, glanced over at Yojiro's face. There's a famous line in that play, "Pity's akin to love," he quoted, and then blew out great clouds of philosophical smoke once more. That sounds like something you'd find in Japanese poetry too, Sanshiro said this time. The others all agreed it did sound familiar, but none of them could actually think of an example. So they decided to give translation a try, and all four of them took a shot at it, but nothing came together. Finally, Yojiro, the only way to do this one justice is with a folk song. Yojiro offered, in his characteristically Yojiro way. The whole feel of the line is folk song, so the other three decided to hand over all translation rights to Yojiro. Yojiro thought it over for a moment. Then, it's a bit of a stretch, but how about this? Feeling sorry for someone, well, that's just falling for them, isn't it? That's terrible, just terrible, the height of vulgarity, the professor said, pulling a sour face on the spot. But the way he said it sounded so utterly vulgar itself that Sanshiro and Mineko both burst out laughing at the same time. The laughter had barely died down when the garden gate creaked open, and Nonomiya stepped inside. "Is everything pretty much sorted out?" Nonomiya said, making his way to the spot directly in front of the veranda and peering in at the four of them inside the room. "We're nowhere near done," Yojiro chimed in right away. "Maybe we could use a little help." Mineko joined in, matching his tone. Nonomiya smiled with a grin and said, "Sounds pretty lively in here." "Anything interesting going on?" he asked, and turned around to sit on the veranda with his back to the room. "I just did a translation and got scolded by the professor for it." "A translation? What kind of translation?" "Oh, nothing much. It's just feeling sorry for someone is the same as being in love with them." "Oh?" Nonomiya said, turning diagonally on the veranda to face them. "What on earth does that mean? I don't follow it at all." "Nobody can make sense of it," the professor said this time. "Well, I crammed the words a little too tightly together. If you stretch it out to something more natural, it goes like this. So, to feel sorry for someone is to love them." "Ah ha ha ha, and what does the original say?" "Pity's akin to love," Mineko repeated. Her pronunciation was beautiful and clear. Nonomiya got up from the veranda and took a few steps toward the garden, then turned around and stood there facing the room. "That's a clever translation, I have to say." Sanshiro couldn't help but notice the way Nonomiya was holding himself and where his eyes had settled. Mineko slipped into the kitchen, rinsed out the cups, brewed fresh tea, and brought everything out to the far end of the veranda. "Tea," she said softly, and settled down right there. "And how is Yoshiko doing?" she asked. "Yes, her health has recovered," he said, sitting back down and sipping his tea. Then she turned slightly toward the professor. "Professor, I went to all the trouble of moving to Okubo, but it looks like I'm going to have to come back to this side of town again." "Why?" "My sister started complaining about having to walk through the Toyama fields on her way to and from school. On top of that, since I run experiments late into the night, my sister says it's too lonely waiting up for me until all hours. Of course, it's fine for now since our mother is still here, but once she goes back home, it'll just be the maid left with her. Two cowards like us just couldn't stand it, I'm afraid." "What a hassle," he said with a half-joking sigh. "What do you think, Satomi-san? Would you mind taking in a boarder at your place?" he asked, glancing over at Mineko. "I'd be happy to take either of them in any time," she said. "Which one do you mean, though?" Yojiro cut in. "Sohachi or Yoshiko? Either one is fine." Sanshiro was the only one who stayed quiet. Prof. Hirota turned a little more serious and said, "So what do you plan to do?" "Once my sister's situation is sorted out, I'm fine staying at lodgings for a while. Otherwise, I'll have to move somewhere else again. I'm actually thinking about putting her in a school dormitory. The thing is, she's still just a kid, so I need to either be able to drop by often, or she needs to be somewhere she can come see me whenever she wants. Otherwise, it just doesn't work." "Then Misato's place is the obvious answer," Yojiro chimed in again. Prof. Hirota didn't seem to pay him any attention, and "I wouldn't mind putting her up on the second floor of my place, but the problem is having someone like Sasaki around," he said. "Professor, please do let Sasaki stay in the upstairs room," Yojiro said, making the request himself. Nonomiya smiled and said, "Well, we'll figure something out. She's big for her age, but hopeless, honestly. And now she's saying she wants to see the chrysanthemum doll display at Dangozaka, and I have to take her." "You really ought to take her. I'd love to see it myself." "Shall we all go together then?" "Oh, absolutely. You come too, Ogawa-san." "Sure, let's go." "Sasaki, you too." "No thanks. Not the chrysanthemum dolls. If I have to choose between that and a moving picture show, I'll take the moving picture show. The chrysanthemum dolls are actually worth seeing." Prof. Hirota spoke up this time. There's probably nothing else in the world quite so artificial, even in foreign countries. You really have to see it precisely because it's so incredibly artificial. If those figures were made to look like ordinary people, I doubt a single soul would bother making the trip to Dangozaka. Ordinary people, after all, you can find 4 or 5 of them in any household. So there's really no reason to go all the way to Dangozaka for that. That's pure professor logic, Yojiro remarked. He used to pull that kind of thing on us back in class, too, Nonomiya said. Well then, Professor, you should come along too, Mineko added at the end. The professor stayed quiet. Everyone burst out laughing. From the kitchen, the old woman called out, "Could someone come here a moment?" Yojiro immediately jumped up with an "I'll go." Sanshiro was still sitting there. "Well, I suppose I should be going too," said Nonomiya, starting to get up. "Oh, you're leaving already?" "So soon," said Mineko. "Give me a little more time on that matter," Prof. Hirota said, and Nonomiya replied, "Of course, no trouble at all," before heading out through the garden. The moment his figure disappeared through the garden gate, Mineko suddenly said, "Oh, that's right," as if she'd just remembered something, slipped on the wooden sandals she'd left at the edge of the garden, and she hurried after Nonomiya. They were talking about something out front. Sanshiro sat there quietly.